is on thank you, Jill, championing wellness and modeling self-care in the workplace. This is part of Child Abuse Prevention Month, our professional learning series. So again, thank you. Keep those things coming in the chat. Those are great. We're all getting so many wonderful ideas. I want to introduce you to our presenter today, Dr. Jacquelyn Zahm. Dr. Zahm is a licensed clinical psychologist. She has extensive experience in psychological assessments and evaluation. She earned her Bachelor of Science in Psychology from Georgia College and State University, and then her doctorate in clinical psychology from Georgia School of Professional Psychology at Argosy in Atlanta. She completed her internship at Mississippi State Hospital, and her postdoctoral training was completed with Georgia Psychological Associates, where she has remained since licensure. Throughout her graduate training, internship, and postdoctoral training, Dr. Zahm has focused on psychological assessment, including personality assessment, psychoeducational assessments, neuropsychological assessments, forensic assessment, and legal competency, such as the competency to stand trial. Dr. Zahm training has also included working with children and adolescents, individuals with severe and pervasive mental illness, and forensic populations. In her current role at Georgia Psychological Associates, Dr. Zahm is the clinical director of the Canton, Georgia location. And there, she provides psychological evaluations and assessment services pertaining to parental fitness, domestic violence risk assessment, substance abuse assessments, and bonding and attachment. Many of you in the room today possibly have been a part of a case that Dr. Zahm may just have done the psychological evaluations for the Division of Family and Children Services. She does a lot of work for them, especially in the Cherokee area, Gwinnett area, things of that nature. So welcome, Dr. Zahm. We appreciate you joining us. I'm going to be the logistics person today behind the scenes, but I'm going to go ahead and just welcome you. If you'd like to turn your camera on, keep it off. If you're eating lunch, the choice is yours. Lots of opportunity for engagement today. So Dr. Zahm, welcome and thank you for leading this discussion today.
Thank you for having me. I want to just start by thanking all of you for taking time out of your day to join us. This is definitely a topic that is near and dear to my heart. The work that we do, as is probably indicative within my bio, I do a lot of very heavy work, as do most of the people in this room. So it's very important to me personally, and for the people that I work with. Self-care has become of utmost importance in my practice, as well as within my family life. So I just want to start by saying I do not enjoy listening to myself talk for an hour. So we want to make this as collaborative as possible. I love hearing from you, hearing your ideas on self-care. I think it's refreshing. We all have slightly different roles and slightly different perspectives. We all have very different ways of taking care of ourselves. I do want to say that I am very jealous and envious of all of the people who are skilled at knitting, gardening, painting. I do not do any of those. I'm going to take down all of your names because I have a young child who is very interested in all of those. So I'm going to take down your name and run through the list. As she is approaching me for various assistance with cross stitching, knitting, painting. So just to share a little bit, a lot of the work when I first came into this field was very heavy indeed. I gained my internship experience in a psychiatric facility. So very heavy work. And to get through that year, a great deal of what I engaged in was physical activity. So for me, my personal self-care is primary physical activity. And then I also enjoy spending time with my little ones. There's something very refreshing about just seeing children be children. So as we move through the discussion today, please take any opportunity to talk about your own experiences and what you do for self-care. I will also add that I am very technologically impaired, so I will rely heavily on Ms. Stein to guide me through the technical portion of this, and also the content was borrowed from Dr. Walsh, who is probably much more familiar with some of the concepts and some of the technical language. So Dr. Walsh, please do feel free to jump in at any point to add anything salient. So we'll just start by glancing over the objectives for today's Lunch and Learn. First, we want to identify the basic aspect of trauma-informed practices, reflect upon our own personal experiences, and then always there's an action item. We want to discuss at least one strategy for self-care to apply in a challenging situation. And we all have kind of talked a little bit about a basic strategy for self-care, and we will try to hone in on specifics and identify a new activity for self-care, as well as how we can apply it in a particularly challenging situation. So first of all, it's important to define what exactly is trauma. Trauma is defined as an experience that is overwhelming or threatening. It can be a single event or the compounding of many stressful events over time. And it's important to note that it's personal and it's influenced by our own life experiences, relationships, and environment. So the most salient piece of information here is to understand that trauma occurs when a person perceives an event or a set of circumstances as extremely frightening, harmful, or threatening, either emotionally, physically, or both. What is the most important word from that sentence? Does anybody care to volunteer? So what's important to realize is that what is traumatic to us is based upon our perception. A trauma is perceived as an event or a set of circumstances that is frightening or overwhelming. So what is traumatic for me may not be traumatic for my colleague because it's based on my own set of personal experiences. The responses that we have to trauma are also very personal. Our experiences are influenced by things that have happened to us in the past, over time, as well as our current circumstances and other external variables, such as the support system that is available to us. What has worked well for us in the past? What have we observed someone else to do that did or did not work well? So there are many variables that are at play when we look at whether or not an event will be perceived as traumatic by a particular individual. And what is trauma exactly? This beautiful diagram that Dr. Walsh put together lists out many different experiences that can be environmental, familial, psychosocial, many things that can be traumatic. Some are persistent and some are acute events or sudden events that occur within our environment. So I think we all know that if a life-threatening event occurs, such as a natural disaster or a robbery or physical abuse, we all perceive this as traumatic for the most part. But there are many other things that we may not have perceived to be traumatic, such as ongoing exposure to substance abuse or ongoing exposure to maternal mental illness, neglect, exposure to parental incarceration. So we see many adverse childhood experiences here, and the research would show that these adversities, especially when they occur early in life, result in poor outcomes, such as poor mental health, poor physical health, failed relationships, incarceration. So stress, trauma, and adversity don't just happen at the individual level. As I mentioned, there are things that we experience through our community and our entire populations that are also traumatic. And if we just look at our population over the last 24 months, I think that it speaks to community and national trauma, as well as the many individual things that were going on in various households throughout this time. And I think most of us can probably attest to seeing the result of that in our own practices. So if you think about yourself, your staff, and the families that you work with, most of them are probably going through many things on this list. The data shows that about 3 in 5 adults report having experienced at least one of the adversities listed. So most of us have experienced some adversity and trauma. So now we're going to talk about how our body and our brain process and deal with trauma. So in this slide that Dr. Walsh put together, we'll talk about our upstairs brain and our downstairs brain. Now, our downstairs brain is the more primitive area of our brain that focuses on survival, such as fight, flight, freeze responses. This part of our brain regulates our basic functions, such as breathing, heart rate, and other bodily functions. It also houses the emotional core of our brain and our survival reaction. So when we have a visceral reaction to something in our environment, such as our heart rate increasing, our breathing increasing, we become sweaty, clammy, this is our downstairs brain. And it's not always rational. In fact, it's not rational at all. It can be easily frustrated and quick to anger. It says and does things impulsively. So most of our times that we deal with our very young children, when they have a reaction and they're upset, this is the downstairs brain because the upstairs brain is not yet developed. So when was the last time that you can think of that you were stressed? And if you think about how your body reacted, you can realize what a stress response is like. Stress causes our body to release cortisol. And people who have experienced trauma, their body tends to react more easily and release cortisol more easily, meaning that if we've experienced multiple traumas, our body is much quicker to go into a fight or flight response. Is anybody willing to share what they recall within their body about a time when they were significantly frightened? So every time that I'm giving a presentation, I'm talking about primitive brain versus the upstairs brain, it comes to mind. And I don't operate from a point of repeated physical trauma, just to be fully transparent. But I can share with you that one of the times that our downstairs brain takes over is as a new mama. And I don't know if anyone's ever had this experience, but mama hormones are real. So when I think about the fight or flight response, I'm often reminded of when I brought my firstborn to her first well check appointment. And those who know me, I'm actually a very rational person, usually very non-emotional, very logical, analytical. And so I've had a cesarean section and I have this tiny little baby who's helpless. And as somewhat of a type A, I'm trying to do everything just perfect. And so I bring her out from her 2-day checkup and I'm putting her in her car seat. And mind you, I'm someone who has never had a physical threat in a car situation. But for whatever reason, mama brain hormones were on high alert. So I'm buckling the child in the cumbersome car seat, and someone says from about 3 feet away, "Excuse me." So I turn around and a completely non-threatening individual is standing there, but all of a sudden my not analytical brain kicks in and says, You have a very fragile infant in a car seat that is now buckled, that you could not get out easily. You couldn't run because you just had a C-section. And there is a person who is larger in stature than you, standing 3 feet away from you. So mind you, all he wanted was directions, but my non-analytical brain immediately said that this is a dangerous situation. So I feel heart rate escalate, blood pressure is through the roof, prepared to fight because I can't run. And I can only imagine what that is like to feel physically threatened for a person who has truly been physically threatened repeatedly. So I say that to say, when we're thinking about interacting with our clients and how quickly sometimes they become activated and it seems irrational to us, I try to reference that point in time when I felt truly fearful for my life for no real good reason. But in that moment, your brain doesn't process it that way. So if you can think of a similar experience, that's what we're referring to when we talk about this fight or flight reaction from the primitive brain.
Great example, Dr. Zahm. And Faith, you had come off mute. Did you want to share an example? We've also got some nice examples in the chat that I can read as well.
Oh, I was just going to talk about a car accident that I experienced back in 2011, and it kind of continues to live in my brain. I just remember being so lucid in that moment, but then after it happened, it was very difficult for me to get back into the car and drive again. And so it just kind of speaks to how our brains hold on to that stress, and they kind of hold on to those memories, and we carry them with us moving forward. And that was, 11 years ago now. And even now, I will occasionally catch myself holding my breath, going around that same stretch of road, just because of that experience. Thank you.
Yes. Well, and we have some other, I love the downstairs brain reactions. Some they freeze, some say my breathing changes, they feel their heart rate increase, the tunnel vision, sometimes trouble breathing, drastic change in body temperature, feeling helpless. And Paula, did you want to share an example?
Yes, I would like to share one. My sister and I, we were in New Orleans, and we were at the traffic light. There was one car in front of us, and we were the second car, and there was a car behind us. Well, we were engaged in conversation. I wasn't really paying attention because I wasn't driving. My window was down on passenger side, and I think hers may have been down. But a man, I could hear the music like playing a guitar. But the next thing I heard was the man was in my window, and I just kind of like didn't know what to do. I'm frantically trying to find the button to roll the window up, and it just kind of, I just felt disturbed about it. It was really frightening. Yeah. And he just was asking for money, I think. Yeah.
Good example. Veronica.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. So I can share one that unfortunately I'm probably going to be living with this for the rest of my life, but I have a daughter who has juvenile diabetes. And so she wears the Dexcom on her arm, and she wears the other thing that gives her insulin, and she can check her carbs. So I have the app on my phone, and I can see if her blood sugar is up or down. One time her blood sugar fell low in her sleep, and she was screaming from down the hall that she was screaming my name, and somehow I heard her in my sleep, and she was having a seizure because her blood sugar had fallen so low. Even though I have the app, she has the app, my husband have the app, but nobody heard the little notification that her blood sugar had gotten so low. And so I knew what to do. I knew that she was having a seizure because her blood sugar was low. I checked her finger. I ran to go and get the the glucagon, the glucose to try to, give her that shot to bring her out of the seizure and bring her back up. And my husband was just frozen. He didn't know what was happening. It just didn't register him because she's had diabetes for so many years and she's never gone low like this in her sleep where it caused her to have a seizure. But I think it affected me because now in the middle of the night, I wake up, I check my phone to see what her blood sugar is. When I get up in the morning, I thank God, I check my phone to see what her blood sugar is. So even when she goes to her friend's house, I check my phone. And so she's about to graduate and go to Kennesaw. And I said, well, I don't know if you need to live on campus because I can't get to you. You right down the hall now. She was like, Mom, I'm going to be fine. I'm like, well, I don't know if you can go on campus. So that's our conversation right now. Should I? Because I'm all the way in Beaufort. You're going to be all the way in Kennesaw. I just don't know. And so I know I responded the correct way, especially once I snapped my husband out of it and he realized what was going on. But it has traumatized me. I felt like the first day when she first went into DKA, when she was 6 years old, she's 18 now. But to see her shaking like that in the seat, it really affected me. And now I wake up in the middle of the night to check my phone to check her blood sugar. So it's just someone live with probably for the rest of my life. And I'm okay with that because she's my daughter. But yeah, it has really, really affected me that day. So yeah.
Such a good example of that personal experience and how it affects us all differently. Thank you for sharing, Veronica. Dr. Zahm, I know I'm going to advance the slide for upstairs. Such good information. Thank you for sharing, everyone.
So I had just a couple of comments, and thank you for sharing, but I wanted to mention about and I apologize, I'm not good with names, but the lady who shared about the car accident. I just wanted to mention, for most of us have probably had a fender bender, at least at this point in life. And I do recall, before ever having been involved in an accident, I wasn't as vigilant on the road. But after having an accident, I think we do notice that if we see someone coming up quickly in our rearview mirror, we tense up, we grab the steering wheel. So I think that's a perfect example of how our personal experiences shape our response and make us more on edge, more vigilant, and more quickly to respond. More quickly will our body generate that fight or flight response. And the example, Veronica, and I'm sorry, I don't want to butcher your last name, but the example with the daughter with diabetes, this is actually something that I've seen since the pandemic, and your example resonates with me. I have a sibling with juvenile diabetes, but also I've worked with a family where it seemed as though the court system was having very little patience, wanting a child back into school. And there were issues with truancy when a child transitioned from virtual school back to in person, and the child had severe diabetes. And so the family had seemed to become more comfortable with that 1 year of virtual school, and then having that child out of their sight after hearing that monitor go off was very terrifying for both the parent and the child. So we had to have a conversation about, while education is important, you have to realize this child's physical safety is what is triggering this reaction by the parent. And after hearing that monitor go off and fearing for their child's life, they're not as concerned about education at this particular moment. You can always get an education later, but when that monitor goes off, that is a life-threatening situation, and it shaped their experience, and it presented an entirely different layout of the land when talking about transitioning from virtual school to in-person school. And I think we all have some examples during the pandemic where we can see how people's experiences were shaped. So moving on to the upstairs brain. So the upstairs area of our brain is where all our higher functioning happens. It's often referred to as executive functioning, such as decision-making, setting priorities, understanding the difference between right and wrong, delayed gratification, all of these things that we really start to see develop during adolescence. And they're really not fully developed until we're about 25 years old. So this is our logical brain. So when we're relaxed, we're able to use our logical brain. But once our autonomic nervous system has kicked into overdrive, oftentimes we aren't able to access our logical brain. So when we look at what's going on inside our body when we're relaxed, our brain is secreting the hormone serotonin. So serotonin helps regulate our mood, our sleep, and our emotions. And because it can help us think logically and emotionally, it's very important, and it's a hormone that we often talk about when we're talking about mental illness and depression. Some of the things that we know, and this is why brings us to the topic of self-care, there are many things that we do that causes our brain or helps our brain to naturally increase the level of serotonin. One thing is exercise. Exercise is shown to be of equal efficacy to antidepressants in many situations. Some other things are certain foods, healthy proteins, healthy fats, some fruits help with the production of serotonin, meditation. So all of these things that we're doing when we're practicing good self-care, good nutrition, a proper sleep, exercise, it's helping our brain to produce the hormones that make us happy, healthy, and relaxed. So our upstairs brain is also very greatly influenced by our early experiences and our early relationships and connections. And there are many, the relationship is very complex, but there are many reasons why those early attachment relationships are so important. But one is that it helps our brain learn to self-regulate and learn to release serotonin appropriately. A low level of serotonin has been linked to self-destructive behaviors as well as mental illness. And if you think of some of the children that you work with who have experienced constant state of trauma, frequent trauma, high stress, high release of cortisol throughout their development in their early years, if you think about how that plays into their ability to self-regulate as they become older, even as children, how it plays into their ability to self-regulate. I think that it definitely provides us with a lot of information about how trauma can be so detrimental on every aspect of a child's functioning, from their ability to sit and attend in a classroom, their ability to learn to delay gratification, their ability to form healthy relationships. So this brings to the forefront why it's so important for us to look at early relationships with children. And personally, this is one reason why this topic is so near and dear to me. I do believe that we have the greatest impact when we start within our own circle. So taking care of ourselves is important, so we can first give our children the things that they need, and then the people within our immediate work circle, our clients who we're working with. But I think it's very important to remember, if we burn out, if we don't practice good self-care, our own people at home are not going to get what they need. So I think this is a good place for a reminder. So when we talk about stress on our body, a lot of us tend to carry it in our jaws and in our shoulders. Those of us who work with populations who experience a lot of trauma and are often stressed, we can usually see it when they walk in the room. So if you can just take a moment just to think about your own facial muscles, how do they feel right now? Are your shoulders drawn or are they relaxed? If you've ever practiced progressive muscle relaxation, which is a technique where we systematically go through each muscle in the body and we actively learn how to clench it and then relax it. Had a professor early on who truly believed if we all learned progressive muscle relaxation and learn to be aware of when our jaws are clenched and when our shoulders were relaxed, that therapists who work with populations with anxiety would not have a job anymore. So it can be very effective for sure. So I want to take a few moments just to talk about specifically, back to our objectives, trauma-informed care. What does it mean? Trauma-informed care recognizes the pervasive nature of trauma and promotes environments of healing and recovery rather than practices that may inadvertently re-traumatize. It takes a network of support to keep us resilient. So what we're talking about is recognizing the pervasive nature of trauma and promoting an environment of healing and recovery. So can someone in their own words share what trauma-informed practice means to you? And I think we're referring to bringing this into our workplace. I think that what we want to do is invite the conversation. When we talk about the traumatic experiences that people have, we all have our own experiences, we all have our own trauma. And so I think first and foremost, it's recognizing that our employees, not only are we all dealing with heavy content, heavy subjects, we all are seeing experiences every day, whereas we're exposed to secondhand trauma. So I think it's inviting the conversation, giving people this space to talk about how their job may be weighing upon them, about things in the environment that may be where we may be unintentionally re-traumatizing them. So I think it's creating a safe space where people feel that they can be heard, and that their experiences are important.
I think sometimes too, I don't know if this is an example per se, but just sometimes there's fear of how by being open and being honest, that there might be some form of punitive retribution, that like one might be related to, you know, your actual performance. And so just, I guess sometimes too, like you said, creating an environment where people can feel like it's safe to share what's really happening in their life, and that it, you know, it won't be held against them. That instead you'll be supported, or maybe there'll be something that can be arranged to help navigate what it is that you're experiencing in your world.
I think it's, and kind of piggybacking off what you said, I think it's important to realize for many of us, there is emotional traumatization in what we do, as well as physical threats. Some of us often feel physically threatened by nature of the work we do, the populations. So we have certain conversations in our office of certain therapists or employees who don't feel safe working with certain populations, or they have certain needs, like knowing that someone is in earshot, knowing that there's a code word that can be used if they feel physically threatened. And I think that first and foremost, it's important that employees feel physically safe when they come into the workspace. And if they don't, feeling that it's safe to say so and to ask for solutions. And then second, as therapists and as mental health providers and as educators, as individuals working within the court system, we often feel like we're not allowed to be fragile. And that being fragile or admitting that something is eating at us or weighing on us is an indication of weakness. And I think that it's very important in this field to recognize that we're human and we should feel those things. Not only is it normal to feel those things, but to have empathy for the population that we serve, we're very likely to feel those things. So spaces to discuss your emotions, your reactions to various things are very important. Some of the departments have forged efforts to start support groups, where there's a neutral party who can just sit and listen to various employees share their reactions to certain things that are going on within our work environments. So, and then we move beyond the workplace to some degree. But we want to talk about when we're creating this safe space, a sense of collaboration, a sense of trustworthiness, how do we communicate that to our families and to our coworkers, that it is safe to talk about what you're experiencing and how you feel? So how is it that we communicate to our employees and to our family members, one, that we value them, and two, that this is a safe space for them to discuss what's going on in their world and how they may be emotionally affected? Is anybody willing to share what it is that you do in your workspace to let your staff know that you have an open door policy or that they can come to you?
I can share this, Veronica. One of the things I do, I ask them, do you feel safe? And I tell them, when you go into home visits or when you pull up to a new environment that we've never been to, make sure you look at your surroundings. And if you don't feel safe going into that home, if you see beer bottles or if you see people outside that look questionable to you, you do not have to go into the home. So I always tell them that we always have to put safety first. And sometimes when we're doing initial walkthroughs, we don't know the people. They've come in and we have a copy of their driver's license, but we don't know these people. So I always tell the staff to make sure you feel safe when you walk into any environment, even if it's a new potential foster parent or if it's a foster parent that we've had for years. I recently had a situation where one of my staff went to a foster home and she felt unsafe. She felt uncomfortable. And so the next time it was time for her to go there, she mentioned it to me that she was on her way there and the mother was not going to be there, but the husband was. And I said, well, I can just go with you. I'm in the car right now. I'm about to change my navigation. So I put it in my address and we pulled up. I actually got to the house before she did, and we did the visit together. And then the mother showed up at the house. And so that's what I do. I try to support the staff in every way that I can. And I try to make sure that they communicate with me and with the rest of the leadership team on any uncomfortable feelings that they may have, or if it's a conversation, if it's a word or anything that's being said to them to make them feel uncomfortable, make sure they communicate with us so we can support them. Yeah.
I think that's a very good practice. And I think that most supervisors have that in their hearts and in their minds, and that's how they feel. And I think oftentimes we forget to verbally communicate that it's okay to ask for help, or it's okay to say that you don't feel safe. And if we never say it, our staff doesn't know that they can have that discussion. I had an experience as a postdoc where I went into a jail to do an evaluation. And I often go into jails to do evaluations, and I usually feel comfortable. But this particular situation, the inmate and I were in the same room, and the door, my option was to either have the door closed behind me and lock, meaning that I'm locked in the room with the inmate, or to leave it open, propped open, and general population was walking around outside, and there was no deputy in eyeshot, and the inmate was agitated. So I was very uncomfortable, and I stuck it out, and I brought it up in supervision with my supervisor to process it, and he immediately said, "Why did you do that? Why didn't you leave?" And I thought it would have just been devastating and such a disappointment if I had not completed what I was asked to do. And his reaction was the total opposite of, like, why would you have ever stayed through something that you felt unsafe? So I think it just emphasizes the importance of having the conversation on the front end, whereas people know it's okay to say that you don't feel safe and to retreat and to listen to your gut, that we should never stay in a situation where we physically feel unsafe. So that some of the other ways that Dr. Walsh has listed of showing that we care about ourselves and our staff, our family, one are affirmation statements. Again, verbally telling people or in writing, letting them know they're appreciated, letting them know how we feel, letting them know that their safety is important, by meeting their needs, asking are their needs being met, offering to go with them if they feel unsafe. And another important point is setting boundaries. When we set boundaries, sometimes we feel as though it's going to be perceived as punitive by the other party, but having good boundaries actually encourages the safety of both parties. Working with traumatized individuals, we know that people do not feel safe if they feel that there are no boundaries by either party. We see it with children. When our children feel like they're in control and a parent is not the person in control and they won't set parameters, children don't feel safe. So don't ever be afraid to set boundaries. Set boundaries with your supervisor. Let them know when you've had, when your plate is full and you've taken on all that you can take on. And by the flip side of that, as supervisors, I think we have to invite and encourage employees to set boundaries. So on this slide, each box is filled with different ways that we can promote resilience. And resilience, can anyone speak a bit about why resilience is important? So when we talk about resilience, as we mentioned a couple of slides back, most of us have experienced a traumatic event, probably anywhere from 70 to 80%. But only about a third of the population who has experienced trauma will actually go on to develop a post-traumatic stress disorder or a trauma and stressor related disorder. And when we look at what distinguishes people whose functioning becomes severely impacted across the long term versus individuals who are able to weather trauma with minimal impact, what we see are these different factors that influence resilience. So each box elaborates on some particulars. One is connections, our social support system. And that can take many different forms: a friend, relationships, the individuals we have in our life who are compassionate. The second box, fostering wellness. And this is the mental attributions that we make. Do we make time for fun things? When we're stressed out, do we take action to reduce our stress? Finding purpose. The research shows that people who have a strong religious belief system are more resilient to trauma, and also embracing healthy thoughts. So we're going to just take a few minutes to skim through these boxes. And then I think Ms. Stein has a breakout opportunity.
And I'm wondering, we're at 12:48. So maybe we'll just kind of all stay together and do, where people could possibly put in the chat. If when you're looking at the screen and you see the build connections, are you able to check at least one box or one activity or item in each of these boxes? So we'll go about it that way versus doing, breaking out into rooms. So if anybody wants to come off mute and share an example from these boxes or just toss in the chat, that way too, we can have time for a couple of activities on fostering wellness. I know earlier we were putting a lot of these in the chat when I think of fostering wellness, things of that nature. Oops, I moved my mouse. I'm so sorry.
The building connections is the one that resonates the most with me. As an introvert, I think I'm inclined when I feel overwhelmed to withdraw. And so I have to, and it's also sometimes it may be perceived as a sign of weakness to reach out to my support system. So I have to remind myself often that isolation is correlated with depression. And as a mental health professional, when people isolate, we encourage them to call upon their support system, and we make it actionable. We not only say, don't do that, but we say, okay, what are the 3 things that you're going to do this week to bring you in contact with others? So the building connections is the one that resonates the most with me. And taking action to reduce stress. I'm definitely an action person. If I feel overwhelmed because I have 10 things on my to-do list, I have to make a plan to start checking them off.
And I see some of my teammates are using the annotate function. So feel free if you all want to plug anything in on your screen. I know everybody joins a meeting in different ways. So if you can't, feel free to toss it in the chat. I see Tanya have the capacity to give compassion and forgive, to have compassion and forgive. So important. Karen, thank you for joining us. We make sure we get the evaluation link out to everybody as well. So thank you, everyone.
Able to let go of anger. It's a very important one.
Great examples. Last thing I have time for, building connections. You're right. You're right. I tell you what, one little book club with my friends group, and I feel like a whole new person. So those connections, I might not have time to go, but man, it's like an appointment I put in my calendar. I love it. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. I know we've only got about 8 minutes left, so we might not have time for everything. We've had such good conversations, but let me get things moving on. I'll go ahead and clear the invitations. Oh, somebody cleared for me. Thank you, friends. My teammate. So for this, I'll hand back over to you, Dr. Zahm. I know we have limited time.
So we'll take just a few minutes just to mention some of the resources for self-care. And I found these to be particularly helpful because there are things that we can do sitting at our desk. There are things we can do in the moment when we feel overwhelmed to help bring us back to reality. One thing that I found is very important to remember in this field is that our clients need us to be able to tolerate emotion. When we become overwhelmed by emotion, then we are no longer the treating professional. Then they often switch into a familiar role of feeling that they are the caretaker, because a lot of our clients and the individuals that we interact with have had to take care of others when others emotionally decompensated. So I found these 3 simple things to be very helpful in the moment with clients to help maintain my own emotional regulation and to help keep me grounded and strong in the moment. And then I can fall apart later with my support system, but these 3 techniques I find to be very helpful in the morning, in the moment. One is tracking, which is noticing and paying attention to what is happening inside your body at the present moment. So if we were to do this in the moment right now, if you feel comfortable to do so, I would invite everyone to sit back and close your eyes just for a moment and just notice how you feel. Do you feel alert, motivated, daydreamy, stressed? Is your jaw clenched? Is the temperature in the room comfortable? So just bringing our awareness back to our own bodily sensations can help us regulate in the moment. It's focusing on your 5 senses. What do you hear, taste, touch, or smell? And this is also some of the things that we encourage our clients to do in mindfulness therapy. And thank you, everyone who embraced that. The second activity that we can call upon for self-care is resourcing. That's thinking about our past experiences that were positive and calming. So if there was a vacation that you took, or a moment that you recall with your own care provider, or time that you recall with your own loved ones. Just being able to envision those and place yourself back in that situation when you're feeling particularly stressed or overwhelmed. So if you can think just for a moment of a time in your life that was particularly calming, where you felt nurtured, where you felt safe, and just notice what happens inside your body. Does your breathing slow down? Do your face muscles relax? Do you smile? And our third self-care tool is grounding. And this is realizing and recognizing a part of our body that is in contact with something at the present moment. It can be your feet on the ground, your arms pressed against the chair, the feel of our clothing, or standing against the wall or a surface. But it is relying on something physical in your environment and recognizing the bodily sensations with that to help you feel comfortable. So maybe wiggling your toes, pressing your back against the chair. And we've already talked about many examples for routine self-care. And I think that this is a great wrap up.
Sit down. Sit down. Deep breath. Take another one. One more. Shake it off. Okay, listening ears. Good job. Now tell mommy what's wrong. What would you like? You want a Mickey goldfish? We can do Mickey goldfish. Okay, take one more deep breath. Shake it off. Good job. Let's get some goldfish.
So just looking at this exercise, some of the things we can do in the moment to help bring down our bodily, our heightened nervous system, taking the 5 deep breaths, a drink of water, walking outside the room and enjoying nature, paying attention to the colors in the room, counting backwards to 10. Do we have time to discuss barriers of self-care? I don't think we do.
We have 2 minutes left.
Okay.
But yes, if we want to, I'm trying to think, we have just 2 more slides left.
I think we all are aware of some things that keep us that get in the way of self-care. Our own critical nature, burnout, inadequate knowledge of self-care. So I think that we all can think of many things that are barriers to self-care. I like the last slide. I'm an action-oriented person. And I feel like when we make a plan and we put it in writing, that's when things really happen. So if we could go to the last slide on a plan for self-care, just drawing from what we already have, and anything that we can incorporate from the mindful skills that we learned today, and then statements of encouragement that we can draw upon, statements that we make to ourselves. And I think that Ms. Stein has an adorable little video of a 3-year-old's self-affirmation statements.
I am smart. I am blessed. I can do anything. I am smart. I am blessed. I can do anything. I am smart. can do